I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities and Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Tom, we finally are reviewing a metal album.
Yeah!
It's been a long time. We do a lot of indie rock, indie pop, indie crap that we have to just review. And it's not like we really want to review indie music all the time. We really don't. We actually really like hip hop, and we really like metal. We love post rock. I mean, let's just get that. Like, we're big on post rock. So it's really nice to break out of the indie box every now and then. Today, Agalloch, the Serpent and the Sphere. This is a Portland-based metal outfit. They've been around since like the mid-90s. I've honestly never heard of them before reviewing this. You guys requested this. Several people requested this album that we review it. So we heard it was metal, and we're like, hey, yeah, let's do this. So, you know, these guys have been around a while. This is their 5th record, and honestly, I didn't really have time to go back and listen to their previous record, so that's on my to-do list. But I did get to enjoy some kick-ass metal music. But Tom, you are very... I didn't even like metal before we started doing it.
It took a lot of work, folks.
Velocities and Music was when I started to like metal, and like Review 100 was Metallica, Master of Puppets, and that's when you really convinced me. You had me on the hook, and that was interesting. I think there's a lot of comparisons you can make between Master of Puppets and the Serpent.
Oh yeah, well that style has certainly been influential on metal since the mid '80s when it came out. So you hear that kind of trickle through, but really metal as a genre has just exploded in so many branches. I mean, and
subgenres that we choose not to acknowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Because it just gets complicated because there's the whole problem of how do you define those? People are going to have different ways of defining those subgenres across the board. So, you know, we try to keep it a little more broad, and then rather than throwing things into boxes, just kind of talk about what we observe. Yeah. So, you know, in metal, as with all music that has instrumentals and vocals, those are kind of the two main buckets that you want to look at. So, kind of taking a look at how the instrumentals work. I mean, this is the kind of metal where you have a lot of acoustic incorporated into it.
Several acoustic tracks.
Yeah,
it's really like classical acoustic guitar at times, which is something that Metallica did.
Yeah, that's true. And it's something that bands are doing a lot these days, just to kind of provide some atmosphere, some mood, which I think is nice. It gives a little bit of context before just rocking out, right? It sets up some things such as even just time and key signatures, those chord structures, a given mood.
Yeah, it provides a lot of contrast on an album listening experience. It allows you to have a soft moment on the album and allows your metal tracks to be louder, bigger, and thus more powerful. And it's a needed element almost on a lot of albums. In fact, there's a lot of post-rock that would benefit from taking some of those motifs and incorporating it into that style too.
That's very true, because that genre actually doesn't do it quite as much as like real raw metal does these days. This album also, I noticed, is fairly polished. There's a lot of, like, especially in the black metal area, that has, I feel, you know, it has a tendency to be much more raw. We've reviewed an album by Deathspell Omega that we really liked, and that was a little bit more raw, a little less polished. This is pretty polished, and especially when you get to some more of the rockin' tracks, things are very, you know, they're still heavy, but they're sharp, they're clean sounding, and a little bit more progressive, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And now vocals.
Yeah.
Vocals on this album are used sparingly, which is something that I always respect on a metal record. You have to know when you're adding value with your vocals. This is not just metal, this is really all genres. You really shouldn't add vocals if it's not adding any value, and there's a lot of pop bands that should take note of that. Yeah. But in this album in particular, the vocalist is very raspy. It's not like the it's more about you know, kind of just haunting the tracks.
I think that's the best way to describe it. It's just do an impression.
Absolutely. But the thing is that the way he's approaching his vocals, making that more raspy kind of, it sounds more broad, and it blends in with the music a lot more. It literally adds texture to the sound.
It does.
And that's something that I actually think is very functional on top of adding a vocal element.
Yeah.
And really, there's only a handful of tracks where the vocals are even noticeable. You know, later on the first track, then also track 3, the Astral Dialogue uses a lot of vocals there, and I actually like what they're doing vocally, even though it is so dark and raspy. I think it adds a lot to the song. It gives it just a very dark, aggressive demeanor and a lot of sonic texture, since they're not really using any electronic elements in here, very rarely anyways. And so I really like what they're able to do with the vocals, and the fact that they know when. There's a lot of just moments during these tracks. You know, this is a 9-track album, and several of the tracks are acoustic guitar interludes, right? right? So the 6 tracks that actually are metal tracks, they're a little bit longer, and there's minute spans, like a couple minute spans where there's just no vocals, and I actually really like that. Most of these tracks, most of the metal-oriented tracks start out with like some sort of guitar line, and then instruments build in, and then you really have dueling guitars doing some sort of melody going on that you hear for a couple minutes, and then they build and rock the hell out at the end.
And those moments are a little bit more swirling and just kind of technically heavy rather than being like riff heavy.
Yeah,
it never feels like speed metal where you're just driving along, chugging along, right? It feels it's more intricate than that.
It's all about the melody.
Oh, totally. And all of that comes from guitar because you're not really getting melody out of the vocals here, And I want to jump back to something you said about, even in pop music, being able to realize when vocals aren't needed. And I think a lot of that comes down to, let's face it, this isn't anything inherently bad about pop music, it's just a different genre, but a lot of pop music relies more on the vocals.
It has to.
So it's like, if the vocals weren't doing anything, well, what would the instrumentals be doing? Right. Metal is kind of the antithesis to that.
Yeah.
The whole point is what the instrumentals are doing and having that technical complexity, and then the vocals can enhance it from there. I think that's actually what makes metal such an obstacle for a lot of music listeners.
That's a really
but
good point.
You just have to get into what the priorities are in that. So I think that from that priority standpoint, I think that Agalloch shows a lot of tact here, and they really, obviously they show the technical ability, that's kind of needed. But in a way, I almost think that what I'm saying about technical ability can be a bit of a hindrance at times. And what I mean by that is that I feel like there's, in metal in recent years, and I don't know, maybe this is why we've shied away from doing a whole lot more metal, because there is some coming out, right? And I did like this album, but it's very rarely anymore that I find metal that really blows me away, that really hits that next level.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is because a lot of metal musicians, it takes an extreme amount of talent and dedication to your craft just to get good enough at any one of these instruments to be able to play in a metal band.
To play, and then let alone have the vision to write something original that actually flows as a record. And I think Agalloch does a pretty good job as trying to form this as a record. They strategically place the tracks in a certain order. It actually flows relatively well, I'd say, but where I get into my serious critique of this album, what kept me out of the 80s, I think lower than the 80s on this one, is the fact that there's really only 2 types of tracks here.
Yeah.
There's really 2 songwriting ideas. The build to explosion level that I described before on the metal tracks, and then you have the acoustic tracks. And the 3 acoustic tracks are all very similar, and most of the metal tracks, there's 3 of them right in a row. My favorite track on this album is track 3, the Astral Dialogue, and then it's followed up by 2 tracks that are very similar to it in structure and composition. So it's just the same ideas being presented and regurgitated again and again. That is not what I want in a good metal record. I want to see new ideas being presented. I want to see new moods or have new reasons to fall in love with an album, because otherwise it wears thin on repeat listens. And that is the key to a great album for me, is that I can come back to it 5, 10, 20, 50 listens later and love it even more on that subsequent listen. And the thing is that didn't happen for me on Agalloch. I felt like I had a good grasp on this record after 2 listens, and by the 5th listen, I was like, it's not really going anywhere for me. And that's just where it is, and it's because there's just not enough ideas in the songwriting. Execution, I thought that the sound that they have is really good, and I really like the acoustic tracks.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. I think if you pick out any one track, this is going to be an impressive listen.
Absolutely.
But when you put it all together, there are definitely going to be spots you like better than others, just because of some of that repeated style and execution.
What are you going to give this one, Tom?
I'm going to give this a 73.
I agree with you. 73 is where this is at, slightly below Velocities and Music's average. Now, I would go and say that we would still recommend this album. This is still a good metal record. It's just like, guys, you got to know, we only review 3 albums a week this year. So, we're pre-screening all of this stuff. So, if it's not scoring very high on our list, it might actually still be a very good album. So, we would still recommend this to you. Go out, listen to Agalloch's The Serpent in the Sphere, and let us know what your thoughts were. We'd love to have a discussion with you about it. Leave us a comment. www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what records you'd like to see Tom and I review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.